So today we're graced with the presence of Mauro Aiello. He's one of our members. He's going to be going over some tying techniques with us. So Mauro, if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background and start away. So go ahead.
Sure. So when I came back into fly tying and fishing about 4 or 5 years ago, and I started learning about all the techniques that are around now, especially things like big articulated streamers, they didn't really exist back in the 90s, or, they were in their infancy and we didn't really know about them very well or weren't very popular. Euro nymphing was not a thing. So all of these new kind of flies and techniques that came up in the last few years, basically all of the techniques I learned back in the 90s were completely applicable to any of these flies and anything in the future. And so just because you're learning a technique for a traditional wet hackle, soft hackle wet fly, those techniques translate to other flies and will translate to other styles that emerge in the future. And so these are just basic techniques that we're going through, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. I'm not one to say that these are the only way to do things. These are techniques that I've used. If you have a different technique and you want to discuss it, please feel free. I'm definitely not saying these are the best techniques out there. So, we'll keep that in mind. But I'll keep this short, but what I would say is that it's really important to use high quality hooks when you're for your fishing, right? So tying flies, you can tie on anything, but don't skimp out on hooks if you're going out and you're trying to do a serious day of fishing. I struggled a lot in my first couple of years with inexpensive hooks. I was a student trying to save money, and I didn't think it made a big difference. I will tell you, it makes a huge difference to have high quality hooks. Yeah. So I use Hanek for dries and lets and nymphs. And then for streamers, I use Gamakatsu and Arex. In terms of thread, I have come across this thread actually probably in the last 6 months, and it's been a complete game changer for me. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes and just talk about some of the threads that these folks make. So the thread that I use now, if I can get that to show up well, there it is Nano Silk by Semperfli. So you can see the size there, 30D, 30 denier. They actually make a 20 or 25 denier, smaller. This is the strongest thread I have ever used. It is an absolute game changer. It's a GSP, gel spun, but it's substantially stronger than other GSPs on the market. And the very nice thing about this, most companies have a GSP that's available in white and black. The nice thing about the Semperfli brand is they have many, many colors that you can choose from, right? And so if you have your favorite pattern and you want to pick a different color, these are all nano silk. So really, just an incredible product, frankly. I think you could get away with 2 sizes of thread for all of your tying, a 30D and a 100D in the nano silk in various colors, and I think that would probably cover all of your tying. In general, the denier, so D is denier. So this is labeled 30D nano silk. So now for the exact same material, a 50D will scale, it's a little bit bigger than a 30D in terms of diameter, and 100 will be double the size of a 50. But it does not scale, like, it's not a direct measurement. It's actually the weight in grams of, and I probably have this wrong, but something like 9,000 yards or 9,000 meters of the thread. That's the weight of it. Okay. So it has nothing to do with the diameter. And so I can tell you that the strength per diameter of the nano silk, because I've gone and looked it up on various websites, is by far the strongest for the diameter. if that makes sense. So this 30D, I bet there's not one fly that you couldn't tie, you know, small, like a size 24, you would have no problem tying it with 30D. And they even make it, I think it's a 20 or 25, I can't remember. So they make a smaller size as well. So I'm going to tie the simplest fly we can possibly tie, which is a woolly bugger. And it's probably going to be slightly different than how you've seen a woolly bugger tied in the past. And so as I go through it, I'll talk about some of the techniques, wrapping the hackle and securing the hackle with the rib and that kind of thing, which is somewhat different from, I think, how most people are taught how to tie a woolly bugger when they start out tying. So I'm also using white thread with a black shirt. So hopefully this shows up reasonably well. So let's talk about proportions for a minute. When you start your fly, okay, give yourself tons of room at the front, okay? The biggest mistake beginning tyers make is they crowd the head, right? They rush the head, they get to the end of the fly and they've got no room to do a knot. Give yourself lots of room at the front of the fly, right? Okay, so there's lots of room there. Use your thread as a marker. So don't let any of your materials go past the front of the thread. Use that thread to tell you, when I get to this point, you know, I'm done. Don't attach any materials past that. So when you're doing a dry fly, I would, so this is completely out of proportion here, but you would tie your wing on first. You would do something like that, way further back than most people would start. Okay, and we're not going to do that today. We'll do that another day. But give yourself room at the front of the fly. Okay, so hopefully everyone knows how to get their thread started. So you do what's called a jam knot, where you're overlapping your thread. Now, the first step is to cover your hook in thread. And the way I was taught to do this by Bill MacGyver was make yourself a little ramp. So hold the thread up on an angle. And as you come down, all of your next turns will perfectly align and you will have no gaps in your thread going back. Does that make sense? Okay. Then, so why do we wrap the hook with thread to begin with? It's to give us something to bite into when we tie in our materials. So if you're using a very slippery thread, like a GSP, it's not a bad idea to cord it up. So you just spin your bobbin. Hopefully you can see that. I just spun my bobbin for a while. And stop your thread just at the end of the bend, which is usually just above where the gouge is. So the beginning of the barb, if you can see that. Okay. So use the hook as a gauge so that when you repeat on the same hook, you will have very consistent results from your tying. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to have a surface that our materials will grip into. GSP generally is very slick. And so what you do, or a good thing to do, is cord up your thread and then go back up and then back down again if you're tying a streamer. Okay. And so what that does, if you can see that, is it gives you a nice rough surface for your materials to bite into. Okay. Make sense? So if you'd like to cord your thread, I usually do it, I guess that would be counterclockwise, looking down on the thread. Sorry, it's out of the screen. So counterclockwise, looking down, right? And that will cord it up, okay? And so another benefit of doing that, and I'll show that when I tie in my materials, but if you watch, when you cord it up like that, it will actually jump back and it's easier to tie in your materials that way when it's corded up. It will force it back towards your hand, and I'll show you that on, on the Marabou. Now, if you want to uncord your thread, and you're not sure which way it's been twisted, just let your bobbin hang and it will naturally start spinning in the direction that it wants to go. And so if you want to uncord it, just spin it in that, let it continue to spin in that direction, and that will eventually flatten out your thread. And don't go too far, then you'll start cording it up the other way. All right, so you can see, hopefully you can see that it's somewhat flattened out there. It doesn't show up that well. But that's a great way to know what direction to go in if you want to uncord your thread. It'll tell you which way it's spinning. Okay. All right. Okay, so now Marabou, you always see the arguments. I mean, it's pretty funny. That's tying on Marabou, right? Shouldn't be a big deal. There's always arguments. Do you use the tips of the Marabou, right? Should you do that with the tips, or should you pull some fibers off the side? I do both. I don't think it matters. I'm sure the fish don't care. So what I like to do is just grab about an inch of Marabou, try to hold the fibers so that they are, sorry, I'll keep it in the camera. Try to hold the fibers so that they're perpendicular to the stem, and that'll keep the tips aligned. Cut off what you need, right? And then make your tail something like hook shank length. And so now, okay, so this is a couple of different ways to get your material on. One's called a pinch wrap. So if you put your material on, bring your thread up. So I'm now pinching it. Unfortunately, I don't think you can see it in the camera. Is that better? I'm pinching it between my thumb and my forefinger. Then I'm coming over the material, still pinched. Okay, so now I've got the material and the thread pinched. Then you can come back up again and then pull, and that thread will cinch it down onto the top of the hook. Okay. And then try to hold the material on the top and just put a few wraps over it to hold it down, and then bind it down really well. Okay. And so here's the advantage of really strong thread. Okay. I can like really crank on this thread. Okay. This is 100 denier. Good luck trying to break it. I really doubt you'd be able to break this thread just by pulling on it like that. At least tying, a reasonable amount of strength tying a fly. Okay. So that's that. So now, the way most people would tie a woolly bugger is they would either use chenille or dubbing for the body and tie in their hackle at the back and then wrap it forward. Okay. A better way to do it is to use a wire as a counter rib. So we take a rib, any wire that you like. Semperfli also makes some very, very high quality wire, by the way. And then we're going to tie in our wire. Okay. And so when you're tying in your materials, again, you're looking for durability in your fly. So what you want to do is come forward with your thread and then fold back the wire. You can see that. So I've just pulled the wire back and then come back over it again. Okay. And you go all the way to the back. And so now we have that wire tied in. Everyone can see that? Okay. So we're going to use this to secure our hackle in a few steps. Okay. So dubbing. So I'm going to dub this. I'm going to share a couple of different dubbing techniques, but the first one we'll do is just a standard noodle. So the way I like to wrap dubbing is, so first of all, the amount. Take less than you think you need, and then cut that in half, right? Use very, very little dubbing to start. And so the technique here is think of kind of like a tornado, all right? So you want to start at the top, you want to spin each thread around each thread of the dubbing material around your tying thread all the way down, okay? And so you always go in the same direction and you gradually work your way down. And then once you have a nice noodle, you can slide that up the thread and then wrap it. So now another trick is after you lock in the first little bit, you can give this another twist again just to secure it. And then you can wrap that up. Okay, so we need a little bit more here. So now I'll do a slightly different technique. This is a Craven dubbing technique, which I really don't like, but I'll show you anyway, because I think some people struggle with dubbing. And so this technique, you actually don't twist it on. You just slide it up. So I haven't twisted it at all. You lock it in and then grab the dubbing in your thread and then just wrap it. And like I said, I hate this technique, but Craven does it, so it's got to have some merit. There you go. All the time, Dan. Okay, so I'll go back and I'll just do it again with a dubbing loop. So when you do a dubbing loop, if you can see that, I've just gone over the thread, made a loop on my fingers. Sorry, I can't see my fingers. So I'm just holding it apart with my fingers and then go around the thread twice, then back over, and that locks it in. Okay, so now you've got a loop here. And then I struggled for years with the back end of my bodkin. I don't know, do you guys have this tool? Anyone have one of these? So this is a bodkin on one end, and then I forget what they call it. It's a shepherd's hook or something. This is a dubbing loop tool. It's absolutely useless. My loops would always fall off. Don't use this. Buy yourself a good dubbing loop twister, something like this, right? Actually, I'll go up to this camera. Okay. So you hook that on the bottom of your loop. You can see that. Sorry. So there it is there. It's hooked on. Okay. And then if you like, you can put in some wax, dubbing wax. That'll help hold your material in. And what's nice about dubbing loops is it's easy to mix materials if you like. So you can put in one layer of one material and then another layer of another material. That's maybe a little more advanced that I want to get into today. But you take a small amount of dubbing, slide it in, and then hold it with your index finger, spin. So sorry, this is off camera. I'm just going to spin this dubbing twister. Give it a couple of spins, and then the important part is hold it from the back and pull. And that will even out all of the twists along the length of the thread. Sorry, I don't know if you guys can see that well. So that's been pulled, okay? So now advance your thread up. Now, if you want to use your rotary function, you can put a half hitch in your thread. Put your thread in your bobbin cradle and then spin it. Okay. And then catch the thread. Just lock in your material. And then when you're cutting off anything, pull up. Okay. Give yourself a chance to see what you're doing and what you're cutting off. And it's incredible how much of a difference that'll make to the quality of your flies, just that simple little thing. Okay, good. All right, so we've got it dubbed. So now the other thing you can do if you like is take your Velcro and pull it out, rough it up as much as you want. Okay. Okay, so now the fun part, hackle. All right, so I'm gonna hackle this with some schlappen, which is a fairly large rooster feather. And so I'll just cut this fluff off for a second here. Okay, so can you guys see that feather? So now the important thing about where to tie in is where the stem of the feather starts to become flexible. And so you'll see that up here at the tip, the stem is very flexible. Right? As you get further down, you'll notice that you reach a point where that stem starts to go straight. Can you see that? It's flexible, and then it stops being flexible. All right. So when you're doing this yourself, you'll be able to notice where that point is. So cut your feather off there, because if you cut it off, if you tie in your feather below that point where it's stiff, you have more chance of breaking the feather, breaking the stem rather. All right, and so my technique for this is a Charlie Craven thing, but pretty sure Bill MacGyver did this as well. So we cut off a bunch of barbs off the bottom. Okay, and so that's how we prep the stem for tie-in. Does that make sense? So that gives you the ability to lock in that feather really nicely on the hook with the thread. And so now tying it in on a big feather like this, I wouldn't do a dry fly like this, but on a big feather, what we do is basically attach it to the bottom of the hook and then do some crisscross wraps over the stem and then come up to secure the end of the stem and then cut off any waste. Okay. All right, so our feather's in. So now we're gonna wrap it like we would normally wrap any feather. So now we'll do this with the rotary vise. Does everyone have rotary vise, or is this, if you don't have a rotary vise, just wrap it like you normally would a hackle. But I'm putting a half hitch in so I can use my rotary vise in my bobbin cradle. Okay, so now the important thing here when you're wrapping your feather is that you hold the feather at a consistent angle, right? So hold the stem, whatever angle you want. Maybe you do one turn at the front, then hold it at a consistent angle and just spin your vise. And you will avoid your hook point, but you will get a perfectly spaced hackle down the length of the fly. Okay, so now this is where the rib comes in. If you can see that, can you see the rib? So I'm just taking the rib, going over the stem, let go of the stem, do one turn, and then just spin the other way and counter wrap your hackle. Okay, so I wrapped the hackle one way and the rib the other way. And then just do one wrap at the end. And sorry for the hands. Capture your wire at the front. A couple of good solid turns. Don't be afraid to really pull on your thread, and then you can break off your wire. Okay. And that's that. So now when you cut the stem off at the back, don't close your scissors. Okay. So if you do that, you will cut some of the barbs off the back and it'll make the back of the fly look kind of messy. So what you do is hold the scissors open and just pull the stem tight with your hand and just push the scissors into the stem. Okay. So I'm not closing the scissors. That's it. Just break it off. Okay. And so what that'll do is it'll avoid having, if you've ever clipped your feather, you'll know that you get a bunch of clipped little pieces of feather at the back of the fly. All right, so there you go. So the feather is, the hackle is on and counter ribbed. And so now what's nice about this is if a fish gets a tooth under the stem and breaks the stem, the whole thing won't come unraveled, right? Because you've got a wire through the whole thing. Okay, so now whip finish. We can talk about whip finishing in a bit if you like. Couple of whip finishes. And again, GSP, don't try to cut it, just push your scissors through it and you're done. All right. It's a big, messy woolly bugger. Okay, so we've done some dubbing and we've done hackle. So let's do some wet fly. I got some requests for different methods of tying in wet fly hackles. So sometimes difficult to get wet fly hackle in small sizes. I don't know if you guys have that problem, but let's say partridge feathers. So if you wrap a hackle traditionally, you're basically stuck with the size of the feather. So there's a few different ways that you can attach a wet hackle, or a soft hackle rather, on a wet fly to essentially shorten the feather, shorten the barbs to more appropriate for the size of the fly that you're tying. So I'll do it traditional first, and then I'll show you some of the other techniques. Start my thread first. I won't put a body on this. You guys have seen me do the dubbing. So just give myself a bit of a thread base here so it doesn't slip. And then when you tie in a feather for wet hackle, the way I like to do it is just clip off, preen back the feathers, and then just clip off the tip. And then tie in that tip. And so the angle of the feather is the concave side down towards the hook, okay? And then that will help it wrap correctly. So we're just gonna secure that in from that tip. And then get our hackle plier. Actually, just so you guys can see what I'm doing a little better, let's strip off some of this fluff here. Oops, sorry about that. Then just grab your feather from the back of the stem and do a couple of wraps, one or two, whatever you think is appropriate for your fly. Then capture material, again, always up, mainly so that you can see it well. And then clip off the stem. Yeah, this is a partridge. You can basically, I guess with a hen hackle, you would tie it in from the tail, but this is just a traditional partridge, Hungarian partridge feather. Then pull back those fibers and clean it up, and that's it. Is anyone still tying these? These are really nice, even on bead head nymphs. You can do nice traditional hackle. I just love the way they look, especially when they're tied sparse. Okay, so that's using the whole feather. So you can see that you're limited to whatever size of feathers you have, right? So now, let's say you're trying to tie like an 18 or something, or a 16, and your feathers are just not that small. So there's a few different ways you can actually achieve that and still have very similar results. Let's tie them off for now. Okay, let's do another one. So one of the ways we can do it, I'm trying to find a bigger feather here. So let's say you've got a feather that's, I don't know, 50% longer than you want it, okay? So I'm going to tie it in here. I want it to the bend of the hook. Now the barbs on this feather are going, let's say, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch past where I want it, okay? So kind of make a mental note of that length, how much longer the feather is than what you want it. And then tie it in that distance back from the front of the hook. Okay, so I'm prepping the feather exactly as I did before. No difference at all. Okay. Tie it in here. So now I'm tying it in, as you can see, quite a bit further back from the front of the hook than you normally would. Okay. And so what we're going to do is wrap the feather and then pull it forward with the thread and then tie it back again. And you'll see that you get essentially the same look that we had with the traditional wet hackle. Okay, so now wrap it exactly as before. We'll give it an extra turn just for fun. Okay. Clip off the excess. Okay. Those won't matter too much. Now what we do is we take these and we pull them forward. Okay. That's showing up okay?
Yep.
Wrap them all the way to where you want them to start. Okay, I'm just doing a few wraps here to secure it. Now we pull them back. And do a few wraps in front to get them pointing backwards. And you can see that we took about 1/4 of an inch off the hackle. Okay. And so that's just a technique you can use if you're trying to tie an 18. Good luck finding a Hungarian partridge feather that'll wrap properly on a size 18 hook. This is a very simple technique to just tie it in further back and then wrap it back again. Does that make sense?
Does make sense. Just a question. So what are you doing about the body there? Are you tying the body after or just
great.
the
Yeah,
body
great
before?
question. Great question. So the way you would do it is you would tie in the hackle, right? And then wrap it forward. So at the point when I had it wrapped forward like this, and all the feathers are forward, that's when you would do your body. So let's just do it now. So you would come back here. Maybe you want a tail, doesn't really matter. You would dub the body at this point. I'll just do a crude dubbing job here. Something like that. And then you would pull the hackle back and just wrap in front. Good. I've got one more soft hackle technique. Again, for salvaging your huge feathers on small hooks. So just getting my thread on. So now you would do the body first, and then when you come up to the front to do your hackle, trying to find a big enough feather so you can see it. So, okay, that's better. You can see how it makes a nice V pattern. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take that V and lay it on top of the hook. If you can see that. And just fold it around the hook. So fairly evenly on both sides. Okay. You can grab the stem and you can pull it forward. And that will give you, yeah, that's right. I forgot to mention that. And then you can preen those forward, and that's another way to get a soft hackle. And I actually like this because you can get it fairly sparse. Just put in a few fibers, okay? Okay, next I was going to do a couple of body wrapping techniques for both pheasant tail and peacock curl. And I know these are, you know, kind of common in everyone's repertoire, but these are techniques that maybe you have not seen before. Maybe you have. So tailing a fly. So let's talk about tailing a fly first. So the way I like to attach tail materials is as follows. So if you wrap, and so let's say you're tying a nymph, pheasant tail nymph. So now you grab your pheasant tail, 3 or 4 fibers off the stem, cut those off. And the way I like to do this, hopefully I can do this without blocking the camera too much, is I like to tie them in on a 45-degree angle across the hook. And the reason for that is it prevents them from rolling over onto the other side of the hook. And it'll keep them centered on the top of the hook much better. Okay, so we take those fibers, and hopefully you can see that. You can see how that's laying on top there. And now what you do is do another turn right in front of it, and then another turn, and you'll see that they straighten out perfectly. Okay. And so if you're having trouble with your tail materials rolling over, that may be one way to help with that. Now, Tim Flagler likes to wrap his pheasant tail in the following way. He actually leaves his thread at the back of the hook and then grabs the pheasant tail and you start wrapping behind the thread. And what that does is it keeps all of your pheasant tails compressed together, and you don't get any gaps or you don't get any fibers trying to get away from you. And this, I think, for pheasant tail body is probably one of the most consistent techniques I've seen, at least, for getting a nice looking pheasant tail body. Good. All right, so that was one tailing technique. Let's do another one. So when you're tailing a fly, sometimes you want all of the tails to be consistent in a clump, so straight out the back. And sometimes you want them spread out, especially for dry flies. You may want some spread in the tails, and for nymphs as well. And so this is an easy way to achieve that. So coming back to your comment about cording the thread, David. So if we cord up the thread, we cord up our thread, you can make a little thread bump at the back of your hook. Okay. And so now when we tie in, and we just bring our thread just slightly in front of that bump, And so now when we tie in our tails, okay, we tie them in again, we put them on a 45 degree angle, tie them in just in front of that bump. And then one more wrap, we'll straighten them out. And then what you'll see is that if you pull down on your thread, you get, sure, I'll get my thread out of the way here. I don't know if that's showing up, but you get a nice spread in the tails. You see that? I'm going to talk a little bit about Peacock Curl and how to tie in Peacock Curl to get the fluffiest results and the best looking flies. Okay, so Peacock Curl. So I use the eyes, buy them specifically. You can get the strung stuff, but the problem with the strung stuff is you don't know which part of the feather the barbs came from. And as you'll see in a minute, it's actually pretty important. So the each stem or each barb, I'm not sure what to call these, but there's actually quite a difference between the quality of the fibers on the bottom side, if you're looking at the eye, and the top side. So when you're wrapping a fly, you want to make sure that the top side of the eye is actually what gets wrapped on the outside of the hook. Okay. The other thing to pay attention to is the stem. So the flues are located on the nice side. So the part of the feather is shiny. That's the side of the stem that the flues will be located on. And so that's important because if you wrap the stem over the flues, you're going to get a matted down effect and you're going to cover up most of your peacock curl. And so the way that I've kind of settled on doing this is you take a feather from, if you're facing the back, you take a feather from the right side and you cut it off. And so you want to know which side the shiny side is, okay? And so you also want to make sure that the stem is laying flat against the back of the hook, okay? And so we'll just get that secured. Leave it there. And then when you wrap the feather, make sure that you wrap in such a way that the shiny side is staying pointing backwards. Okay, so if you've tied it in so that it flips, then you just want to make sure you tie it in the right orientation. And so what you'll see is that by doing it this way, you get a very nice, fluffy peacock curl body with very little stem showing. Okay, is that showing up reasonably well?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so now let's do it. Let's do it wrong so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so we are going to take our peacock curl and we're going to wrap it with the shiny side forward instead of backwards so that the stem covers our material, our flues. If I'm looking at this correctly, I think I've done this right. So now I want that like that. So can you see the difference in the
Yeah.
quality of the body?
Yep.
Well, that's not horrible, but I mean, you can see how the stem, especially at the back part here, right? If that's in focus, you can see how the stem has covered up most of the barbs. Actually, would a white background maybe be better?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so the quality of your flies will improve dramatically if you notice that little detail about which way the flues are pointing on the Peacock Curl. That was the best advice Bill ever gave me. It was just go slow, like just get started. You know, don't spend a lot of money up front.
Oh, that was very well done.